into another episode of Nate Hit the Foul Hole. Today, Matt and I will discuss analytics and how they affect each Oriole. The new regime in Baltimore has brought in analytics and sabermetrics with Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal, and lots of others. So we're going to discuss that and focus in on some key players and discuss how analytics affects each one, maybe where they go wrong with analytics, maybe what helps them out. And I think we're just going to start right off, Matt. Who do you have as your first player you'd like to highlight that really benefits from analytics?
So the first guy I'm going to talk about is Miguel Castro. I think Orioles fans are pretty well aware of his struggles that he's had throughout his Oriole career. And even, without looking at his advanced metrics, his advanced analytics, you can see that this guy has talent. You can see that he has an ability to pitch. He's got the physical tools. He's got a super fast fastball. But I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into Miguel Castro and then make a couple recommendations on how he can improve. So I know we discussed possibly pairing a player comp to each player, and I've done that with Miguel Castro. I would compare him most to Jordan Hicks of the St. Louis Cardinals. Obviously doesn't throw quite as fast as Jordan Hicks, as he can get that fastball up to like 105. But Jordan Hicks is a guy with a super high velocity and also a super low spin rate on his fastball, and that's very similar to Miguel Castro. Miguel Castro's fastball velocity is in the 97th percentile in all major league pitchers. There's about 99 to 100 on that sinker / fastball, but his fastball spin rates hovers right around 50 percentile. Basically, I got all my information from the site Baseball Savant, and the player comp that they most compared Miguel Castro to was Tyler Webb, also of the St. Louis Cardinals. And that's because they both share this stat in common called, are you ready for this, Zach? Are you ready for this?
I'm definitely ready.
It's called xwOBA-CON. Okay?
That's a confusing term.
And I'm gonna explain it to the listeners in a little bit more layman's terms. Okay. So let's take each individual syllable and piece it out. Okay. So the X in xwOBA means expected. These are based off of projections. This guy has a high strikeout rate. He's probably going to be a better pitcher. He's probably going to be more dominant. So that X part is expected. The W in xwOBA is weighted. So this could influence like a ballpark factor or whatever, the case may be. It's just weighted for that specific ballpark or that specific environment. And then the wOBA and the OBA is on-base average. So it's very similar to on-base percentage. It's actually pretty spot on to on-base percentage. And then the con would be on contact. So you have the full thing explained would be expected, weighted, on-base average on contact. Okay? So Miguel Castro and Tyler Webb both had the exact same xwOBA-CON, and it ranks in the 75th percentile. And that would be a pretty good measuring stick to say these two pitchers are very, very similar and very much alike.
Miguel Castro has kind of been frustrating, I think, for a lot of Orioles fans. Came up and really, he's throwing 100 and he just can't control his stuff, and he's had a lot of up and down years. But yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of these guys that the Orioles have right now, there's a lot of hope for them because they excel in some of these categories that you may not look at that are not ERA or FIP or any of those kind of stats. So I think if you dig a little deeper, you can find, the hidden gems of why they're actually pretty good.
Okay, so to just finish with Miguel Castro, just looking at some of his underlying stats and his pitch arsenal. So he throws his sinker the most, which is 49% of the time. Then he throws his slider 31% of the time, and his changeup 20% of the time, which is the least out of the three. What I found out in my research is his changeup, which he throws least, is actually his best pitch. On his changeup, he gets 31% whiff rate. And that tells me that, a third of the time, people are swinging through the changeup. He should be using this more as an out pitch than he is. He should be throwing it way more than a sinker, which isn't effective, which gets hit hard, And just because it's fast doesn't mean it's a good pitch. And the one last thing I have on Miguel Castro is his slider. Just like his changeup, he doesn't throw a slider nearly enough. However, Miguel Castro has the 4th best slider spin rate in all of baseball. 4th best. American League and National League. He should be throwing this pitch not only in 0-2 counts or 1-2 counts or whatever. It shouldn't be just his out pitch. He should be throwing this far more often and his sinker far less. So I think if he threw his sinker and his changeup, his slider and his change far more and his sinker less, he would find way more success, strike out way more batters, and he would be finally reaching the potential that he's always should have.
So I want to do a pitcher of my own here, and I'm going to pick Tanner Scott, and I think he's in a similar boat as Miguel Castro because, he's a guy who has raw stuff and throws really hard, has a really good slider, and just can't do much with it. He can't control it. He never knows where it's going. He is in the 87th percentile in fastball velo, which is really good. I mean, he's hitting 97, 98 lots of times. He also has an 82nd percentile in fastball spin, so his fastball is really good. But the problem is he literally cannot control it. He can't put it in the zone. And when he does put it in the zone, it's getting hit really hard. And he's not getting any sort of whiff rate like he is on his slider, which is actually 47.7%. And his slider is much more effective. He's K'ing 30.3% while using any of his pitches, but it's mainly that slider, which is has 34.4 inches of drop. He needs to throw that slider a lot more because it's nasty, and his fastball he can't control. So he's a guy that just has really good raw stuff. Really needs to throw that slider a lot more. Maybe the same as Miguel Castro, as you just mentioned earlier. And I think could really benefit from working on that fastball, maybe even taking it down a few notches to 94 or 95, just to be able to hit his spots, because he really can't hit his spots right now. But that slider, if he can use it, because he's averaging 8% more in K rate than the MLB average right now using that slider. So if he can keep using that and throwing it, in 0-2 counts, he's going to be really successful. And I think he's just got to learn how to harness his pitches a little better.
Yeah, I've always been a big Tanner Scott fan. I mean, he's got that heat from the left-hand side. He probably has closer material if he could ever harness it. And the only thing I remember about Tanner Scott, he was in that rumored Ubaldo Jimenez trade to the Padres, where we would have gotten B.J. Upton, I want to say.
Yep, that was it.
So, I mean, the Orioles fans were terrified at the time of losing Tanner Scott, and look what he came into. A few years
ago, Scott was a top 5 prospect in the system. And obviously prospect rankings are really subjective, and it is what it is there. But Scott was a really highly touted prospect. Obviously had closer potential, like you just said, and he just hasn't shown yet that he can control his pitches and be effective in the major leagues. So I think he really needs an overhaul with that fastball, especially. He ranks in the 400s out of 500 pitchers, about 500 pitchers in the major leagues on fastball. It's just awful. It gets barreled up a ton, and his slider, he ranks in the top 100. So it's much better, and he's definitely going to have to throw that more if he wants to stay in the major leagues, because right now he's not doing enough.
I agree. My next guy I want to talk about is Pedro Severino. The player comp I have on him would be Carson Kelly from the Arizona Diamondbacks. They're pretty darn close in terms of offensive output. In 2019, Pedro Severino had a .321 on base percentage. Carson Kelly had a .348. They had the exact same pop time. They were both ranked in the 55th percentile. And then back to my old stat that I love, Zach, ex-Wobacon. Pedro Severino had a .391, and Carson Kelly had a .390. So that's how close they were in those offensive categories and in the pop time. All I had else on Pedro Severino, he was ranked in 2019 as the 8th best offensive catcher, and that's with only having 13 home runs. So I think having, over a full season mark with the Orioles, and it's not going to happen this season, but maybe next season he could really improve on that power. And he really looks for those fastballs. When he gets a fastball, he's slugging .533, which is off the charts, especially for a catcher. So I think he's got much in the way of improvement, and he's improved every year of his career thus far.
Yeah, Carson Kelly was a 1.7 WAR player last year, and that was better than Severino. So if he can turn out like Carson Kelly's a great young catcher for the Cardinals right now. And, if he can turn out like him and start putting up more power numbers, 18 home runs from Kelly last year, I think he needs to tap into that power. We did see it in that one Texas game last year where he hit 3 home runs. And, so it's there. I think he just needs to tap into it a little more and find his swing. But yeah, he's a guy I think I'm really excited about because never really found his groove at the Nationals. Comes over to the Orioles right before 2019. And, he became the starting catcher immediately. Chance Sisco, obviously, isn't hard to take over as the starting catcher, but Severino, he's got a lot to prove, but I think he's going to be pretty solid this year. So another guy I want to go on to is Renato Nunez, and he really has a lot that you can talk about stats wise because he really hits the ball hard and he puts up huge power numbers. The guy I would compare him to, and this is probably a little bit generous, would be Nelson Cruz. And I think that it's going to take him a while to get to being Nelson Cruz, but I find the comparison in multiple places that they're both awful defenders. They're power bats that literally only do one thing. They're only good for one thing. Renato hit 31 home runs last year. Cruz hits about 40 every year. So Cruz is obviously still the better hitter, but he really hits fastballs really well. Renato Nunez is awful in the breaking ball. He hits sub 250. He's really terrible. He's a fastball changeup hitter, and he had a combined 262 average on fastballs and changeups, which his regular average is only 244, and obviously average isn't, the best stat to go off of, but he did really hit better on fastball and changeup, and he was awful on breaking pitches. He was in the 67th percentile in exit velocity. That's well above average. He only whiffed 20.7% of the time on fastballs, which was 7% lower when he was facing breaking balls. So this is really good numbers. 20% is not bad at all. And that really is where his power is coming from. If you want to compare him to Nelson Cruz, Cruz is whiffing only 23% on fastball, so he's even lower than Cruz. I really think Nunez has that 40 home run potential. I think he could get there this year if he has enough time. I don't know how many games they're going to play, but he also hits lefties really well. He had an 836 OPS off lefties last year, which is far superior to his OPS against righties. He was only hitting about 600. So he's a really interesting guy, I think, because he can't really do anything, but he just has a lot of pop. So if Nunez can start hitting off righties like he does off lefties, and obviously it's just a perception thing for some guys, they see the ball differently, but if he can harness that power that he's getting off lefties, I think Nunez could easily be a 45 home run guy. And I really like Nunez a lot.
Yeah, I actually really like that comp. It's not something that I thought about prior to you saying it. Clearly he's not Nelson Cruz as of right now in his career. But if you look at their swings, they both have that strong load in their back leg. They both have a quiet lower half when they're swinging. And they both have a similar path to the ball. So I really do like that comp a lot. And, you never know. He could turn into a 40 homer guy, maybe not quite Nelson Cruz, but something very similar. So we'll see what happens.
Yep, just needs to harness that power off the righties, and I think he'll be good to go.
My next guy I want to talk about is Michael Gibbons. Obviously the source of a lot of frustration for Orioles fans because he is the closer and he gives up a lot of home runs, especially in 2019. However, my comp is Dellin Betances, and the reason I say that is because each pitcher has 3 pitches. They each throw a four-seamer, and they each throw a slider. Michael Gibbons throws his four-seamer 70% of the time, while Betances throws it 62% of the time, and then both their other pitches are under 25%. So, looking back at 2019 for Gibbons, he allowed 10 home runs on the fastball. Betances didn't pitch much in 2019, but in 2018 he allowed 6 home runs on the fastball. These are pitchers that rely way too heavily on their fastball because they have extremely high fastball velocity and extremely high fastball spin rate. Doesn't always tell the full story. Michael Gibbons, on his changeup, has a 44% whiff percentage, and he only allowed 1 home run on that pitch in 2019. He allowed 12 home runs on his slider and on his four-seamer. He also has 1.9 inches of movement, vertical movement, on his changeup. And 11% of his pitches were barreled up last year, and that was ranking in the bottom 4 percentage, of the league. This is another pitcher, much in the way of Miguel Castro, that is far too reliant on his fastest pitch. And that sounds pretty intuitive for most pitchers. You want to throw your fastball the most to establish it and to not be as wild and get ahead in the count. While I think that normally is a great idea, I think Michael Gibbons could absolutely dominate with that changeup. I was watching highlights of it. People can't see it out of his hand. This should be a mainstay in his arsenal, and it's just not. So,
I don't know if we can call Gibbons the Orioles closer because he only had 11 saves last year, but he is, I think, the closest thing we have. He's
fair enough.
I do want to make a few notes on him. I mean, he did have an ERA plus of 104, which is above league average of 100, so just a bit above league average. But he was giving up almost 2 home runs per 9, and that's just, it can't happen next year, especially if you're the closer. It just can't happen.
He's perhaps one of the weirdest pitchers I've ever seen, just looking at his advanced data, because he strikes out so many people and allows so much hard hit rate. Like, if they're hitting it, it's out of the ballpark, but if they're not, they're swinging and missing.
And I think that's what we saw from Dylan Bundy a lot last year. I mean, you'd see flashes of greatness where he'd throw that slider down and away and get people completely to whiff, and then you'd see the fastball up in the zone that people would clobber. And that's just the problem with Gibbons, too, is that there's just not a lot of consistency at all, and he's definitely going to improve upon that. I mean, he can't give up as many home runs as he did last year. He can't walk as many guys as he did last year. He's got to improve in a lot of things, but you know, he does have some trade value, and I think we talked about that before, what we could possibly get for him. But, you know, Michael Gibbons is a guy I just like to see a little bit more of improvement for this year. So my next guy is actually a minor league player, and there's not a lot of data available on minor league players, but I did want to point out a few things, because I feel that he's really overlooked, and we actually mentioned him on last week's podcast, but it's Yusniel Diaz, and the big piece in the Machado trade put up huge numbers in Double-A with the Dodgers, and hasn't put up those kind of numbers since he's come to Baltimore. We changed his stance, we messed with a few things, and I'm not sure those are in direct result to his lowering numbers, but he does have some pretty good numbers if you dig deeper. I think a lot of people tend to look at average and RBIs and home runs, and they judge a player off that, and that's just not right. You can't look at those things without digging a little deeper and seeing what else he does. You have to look at OPS for Diaz, and off right-handers, he was batting an .858 OPS, which is really good, and that's in 222 at-bats. That's not a small sample size. And that just shows how much power Diaz has, and he can go gap to gap. He can put the ball over the wall. Only 11 home runs last year, but he can put up doubles, he can put up triples. Diaz is a guy who has a lot of power, and it's all about, for him, just putting it together, I think. It's the swing and making contact with the ball and seeing the ball in. But Diaz, another thing with him is he always gets a really good at-bat. He doesn't get cheated, and I think that's why he has so much power, is because he sees the ball in and he's able to drive it gap to gap, and he fights and waits for his pitch. If you dig a little deeper, Diaz is actually really solid in some of these more advanced numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to argue that other than Adley Rutschman, Yusniel Diaz is the most talented position player in the Orioles system. I mean, he's got a hell of a throwing arm. He's got speed, like you said. He's got power. He gets on base. So, like you just mentioned, it's just a matter of putting it all together. I think it's important that he was a Duquette holdover, but I think Elias recognizes, the potential in this guy, and you just got to figure out how to unlock it.
Yeah, and like you said, he does have a great throwing arm. I was trying to find metrics on that, and I would guess it's probably in the high 80s to lower 90s on his miles per hour for his throwing arm. But he's got a really good arm. I'm not sure he can play center. He's shown that he takes some really weird routes to balls. If you go to Bowie this year or wherever they put him, you will be able to see that he does not take a good route to the ball, so center field might be a little tough for him to play, but I think he could be an excellent right fielder, a middle-of-the-order bat, and hopefully put up really solid power numbers.
If you had to put a player comp on him, who would you say?
The guy I always comp with Diaz is Yasiel Puig, and I think it's very similar in their stance. I think it's the way they play. Obviously gap-to-gap power, as I was saying before. I just think they're really similar players. Both grew up in the Dodgers organization, so probably taught a lot of the same things. They could have been put on the same player progression plans, but I think those two are pretty similar. Puig obviously has that insane arm, right fielder as well. So Yasiel Puig, plays with a lot of enthusiasm, and I think they're very similar players.
Okay, the next guy I want to talk about is Anthony Santander. The player comp I have for him, not necessarily a person you would think about and equate with Santander, is David Dahl from the Colorado Rockies. Looking at their baseball savant grades, they both have a very similar sprint speed. They have a very similar X batting average and X slugging percentage. So that's why I kind of went with that comp. The funny thing I found out about Anthony Santander is he hits all pitches equally. Like, he's not especially proficient in hitting the fastball or the curveball. He hits them all equally, which should be an encouraging sign for Orioles fans to say there's really no out pitch on him. I mean, he's not going to get fooled by a slider. He's not going to get fooled with the curve. He has projectability, and that's something that has staying power. The one thing I don't really like a whole lot about Anthony Santander is he has a very low on-base percentage. If not for the abysmal September that he showed, I think he would have had a higher on-base percentage, but it did finish under 300, and that's not what you want to see from an outfielder. But he does have a high slugging percentage. He hit 20 home runs last year and a limited number of at-bats, so that's very encouraging. He's improved his whiff rate every year that he's been in pro ball, and he's also improved his barrel percentage each year. So I think if you're looking for a breakout candidate overall in baseball, I think Anthony Santander is your guy.
Yeah, and like you said, he's been improving every year. Every single year he hits more and more, and he's done better and better in the outfield, and I think he's really athletic. And David Dahl comp kind of surprises me because David Dahl is known as a speed guy with a little bit of pop as well, and you don't really look at Santander as a speed guy, but once you dig a little deeper, like you said, you look at his sprint speed, and it's actually very similar. And, I think Santander is another guy I could see tapping into the power a little bit. 20 home runs seems a little bit low. Granted, he only played in 100 games, but still, I think that he can easily be a 30 home run guy. Has a lot of power from the left side, not as much from the right, but he's one of the switch hitters that is pretty consistent from both sides, contact-wise. So, he's a definite breakout candidate, like you said. I could definitely see him being one of the better left fielders in baseball, and I could really see him being a great power guy. So the next guy I want to talk about is John Means, and there's a lot of conflicting stuff with John Means about whether he's going to regress or have another All-Star season. I personally see both because I think there's statistics to support both. You look at his WHIP last year, which is walks, hits, plus innings pitched, and it was only 1.14. That is really good. If you don't know what an average would be, it would be about 1.3. So that's really solid numbers. He was in the 75th percentile in fastball spin, and he had a spin rate of 2,376. The average in the MLB is 2,200. So clearly his fastball is really good. John Means we saw blow people by with his 92, 93 fastball, which is really surprising, but the movement on it is really good. He only walked 6.3% of people, and again, an 8% average in MLB. So just a lot of control. He's definitely a finesse pitcher. Like I said, 92, 93 is not going to blow you away, but he does have a really good fastball, and it's really deceptive. And I think it comes from him being a lefty in his arm slot. And I would really give a comparison to Robbie Ray. I mean, I think Robbie Ray has that same kind of arm slot, the big lefty. I think the deception comes from there. He does need to throw his slider a little bit more, and I think that you will see regression with Means if he doesn't start throwing the slider more. He only threw it 14% of the time last year, and that's got to come up. And he did throw it more in spring training this year. So I would love to see him throw that more. It definitely looks better than it did last year, but he can't continue to be a fastball changeup guy because teams are going to figure that out. There's a year of tape on him now, and he really needs to add that third pitch that he can use in 0-2, 2-2 counts. So I really think Means has potential to be a really good pitcher. But then if you dig in a little more, guys kind of barrel him up too. And I think that's pretty common when you see a guy throwing a lot of fastballs. He got barreled up, 6.8% last year. The average in MLB is 6.3, so a little bit higher. Batters also found the sweet spot 37.3% of the time when MLB average is only 33.1. So there's definitely a mix of things for Means that, you can say, okay, he's going to have an all-star year here, but maybe not here. So I want to get your thoughts on that a little bit, Matt. Do you think you see Means as regression?
So what you're telling me is John's going to regress to the means? Okay.
I was like, what? I don't get it. I was going to respond. I was like, I don't get it.
You don't get it?
No.
Okay.
I'm
just going to leave that one to our listeners.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, moving on. Yes, I do think he's going to regress. But I think that's just natural for somebody to come out of the gates like that. A lot of hitters haven't seen him yet. They don't really know what his repertoire looks like. And you saw it kind of a mid-season lull following the All-Star game. He started to inflate that ERA, and then he kind of corralled things towards the end of the year in September there. So I think he's going to regress overall, but I still think he's going to be the best pitcher on the Orioles staff. I do see a potential for another All-Star appearance for him. Probably not going to happen this season, just due to the shortened season, but I don't know how they're going to work that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think he's going to regress, but I think he has such a good feel for pitching that he's going to be slightly above average in terms of MLB pitchers.
Yeah, and I should note that all-star means very different things on the Orioles than it would on a team like the Yankees. Obviously, we don't have as many all-star caliber players, so maybe guys like Trey Mancini, Austin Hayes, Ryan Mountcastle are a few of the options, but we don't really have too many premium players that could put up an all-star season, so it means definitely could be back there, but I guess we should just say a good season as well as he had last year.
Okay, the next guy I want to talk about is the newcomer to the Orioles, Jose Iglesias. And you might actually laugh at this comp, Zach, because my comp for him is Hanser Alberto.
Same team. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting comp.
And the reason I say this is because you look at their gauges on Baseball Savant. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. Like, it's crazy how similar they are. Neither player hits the ball hard whatsoever. They have extremely low exit velocity, extremely low weighted on base average, but they both rank in the 90th percentile or better in outs above average, and that's not something that you would think about for Hanser Alberto as being a defensive wizard, but the advanced metrics do kind of show that. He has he rarely strikes out like Alberto, Jose Iglesias does. So he puts a lot of balls in play, and I think that's why you saw the uptick in batting average last year. In terms of a defensive comp only, I would do Paul DeJong from the St. Louis Cardinals. Paul DeJong had 13 outs above average last year. Iglesias had 12. Paul DeJong had 10 of those going to his left, while Iglesias had 8 of those going to his left. And I think overall, Iglesias had a pretty fluky 2019. You saw a career high in home runs, his highest OPS since 2013. So I think when you look at his profile, when he's in a hitter-friendly ballpark, as his home ballpark, like he was last year with the Reds, like he was in 2013 with the Red Sox, I think that's when you see his career offensively really take off.
And I think a lot of that was because of the juice balls. I mean, I can't imagine that he'd hit those home runs without it and put up all that power. But yeah, Iglesias, he's a really good defender. That's why we signed him. We're only paying him $3 million, and I see 100% that's worth it because of the plays he's going to make it short. I'm not sure I would compare him to Hanser Alberto, and I do know that he is very similar in outs above average, but I don't really think Alberto can play short with the kind of prowess that Iglesias can, and I don't think he has the ability to have the range that Iglesias does. He's definitely not as athletic as Iglesias is, but yeah, I mean, I think in hitting, they don't hit the ball hard, and that's very true. But defensively, I like the Paul DeJong comparison a little more than Alberto.
Embrace debate.
So if we want to keep talking about outs above average here, I think one of the best guys for outs above average on the Orioles was Cedric Mullins. And he obviously didn't last very long in the season, kind of a lost season last year. He obviously didn't last very long on the team. He had a lost season last year. And he really does well with outs above average. And he was ranked 45th, which is not extremely high, but for an Orioles outfielder, that's pretty good. He was actually the best for Orioles outfielders, and he had 3 outs above average. So not a huge number, but he does have a lot of range. He's really fast. He obviously can't hit the ball very well. So Cedric Mullins, his whole game is running down long fly balls because of that speed. He actually can run 19.8 miles per hour. I thought that was very interesting. He's from home plate to first. He's from home plate to first in 4.05 seconds. So he's got a lot of speed. And that gives him the ability to do lots of things. I mean, steal bases, run down long fly balls, have a superior range. So Mullins is a guy I think that you're really going to see catching a lot of fly balls that you're not going to see from other players. Even Austin Hayes, who's a very athletic outfielder and who's going to be playing center for the Orioles this year, is not going to run down a lot of the balls that Mullins would have. He would have a 94% success rate on fly balls last year, which is really, really good. And 86% was the expected on all of those balls, and he put it up to 94. So Cedric Mullins is a really good outfielder, and that sprint speed really contributes to that.
I like Cedric Mullins a whole lot. He's one of the guys I actually root for in the organization. He went to a hitting clinic this offseason. It's kind of a shame that the season's because he won't really get to hit the ground running on his development. But I think he still has a place not only in this organization but on the big league team. Maybe he's that fourth outfielder, kind of a platoon type dude. So it remains to be seen, but I think you make good points, and he's definitely a defensive wizard.
And the comp I would have there is David Lowe. And if you remember David Lowe from Orioles past, just a really speedy guy who could play center field, run down everything, came off the bench a lot to pinch run, really didn't have a very good bat. He'd hit the occasional walk-off home run. But, obviously they're both small outfielders that can run a lot.
Slappy hitter, like slapping the other way.
Right, exactly. And Mullins has shown that he can be more than that. And he's shown that he can hit the ball out of the ballpark, but last year was pretty abysmal in the minors and the majors, so I think he needs to get back on track this year.
Okay, the last guy I want to talk about is Hector Velazquez, perhaps one of the newest Orioles in the organization. And sticking with my Oriole comp theme, I'm going to go back to 2012, and I recently rewatched this game. It's what made me think of him, but I'm going to go to the 2012 Joe Saunders.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because when I think Joe Saunders, I think the good old junk ball, the low velocity, low K rate, but also weaker contact. And that's what Hector Velazquez could bring to you. He's good for a spot start, just like Joe Saunders. He could also long relieve, just like Joe Saunders. But what I like about Velazquez and some of his pitch arsenal is his slider. It's really, really hard to pick up. It's pretty slow. It's thrown right around 80 miles an hour. It's thrown so slow that it almost hangs up there long enough. It's definitely by far his most effective pitch, but he only throws it 16% of the time. He actually has a 5-pitch mix, so I think if he kind of eliminates one pitch out of there, maybe the curveball, which he barely throws and it gets hit hard, I think Hector Velazquez could be really effective and really deceptive with that slider.
Yeah, and he had a few nice years in Boston. So if the Orioles can find that, and that's a lot of what the Orioles are doing right now with waiver claims, is just trying to find the diamonds in the rough and trying to find the guys like Pat Valaika and others that have had really good years in the past and are looking to build on that. So yeah, I like that 5-pitch mix a lot. That's definitely deceptive, and you never know what's coming. So yeah, he could be a very good piece in our bullpen this year.
Yeah, so if you guys have any thoughts on our picks, definitely tweet us in at FoulPolePod. If you have some other player comps that you thought of, or maybe some players on the Orioles that you want us to do a deeper dive into, we're definitely happy to do that. Zach, I believe we have one Q&A question for this week.
We do have one Q&A question, and it is from @Marcus__E. He said, Chris Davis finally got into a groove, and now this whole virus is delaying baseball. Do you think this extra time before the season will allow him to further improve his swing at plate appearances, or will he regress back to his 2018 form? I think Davis, it probably isn't going to affect him. I think Davis is where he's at right now, and I don't think a lot's going to change just based on a few months. He was confident coming into spring training. He's probably not going to lose that confidence over a few months. I think there may be a little bit of change in his swing because he hasn't picked up a bat in a couple months. He's probably not doing a ton of training right now, but as far as confidence goes, it should be about the same. I don't think that will really affect whether Davis goes back to his 2018 form. I think if he goes back to his 2018 form, it will just be because he's Chris Davis.
Well, it certainly gives him more time to get jacked, to lift some more weights, do some steroids, what have you. I really don't think it's going to affect his swing much because he didn't really work on it in the offseason anyway. So I think, if anything, it's not good for him because it's just more delayed time. When he was feeling really good, coming out of spring training. I think this lapse in time is not going to help him at all because he was on such a roll, and I think he wanted to carry that momentum into the season.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that, but I think we'll just have to see how it goes with Davis. Obviously, nothing's proven, and I don't think you can take spring training stats with him too far because it's Chris Davis, and you never can get your hopes up with him. So, that's about it for him. I think that when we come back in July or August or whenever it is, we'll see a mix of maybe what he did in spring training and his 2018 form.
Yeah, so that about wraps up this episode of Nate Hit the Foul Pole. We did want to mention that we do have our GoFundMe in effect for our good friend Justin Labor at Roar from 44. We mentioned it. This is actually the topic of our last Extra Innings podcast. And if you want to donate to that, you can go to GoFundMe.com and just search Justin Labor, LABOR, or just go to our pinned tweet on our Twitter account at FoulPolePod. Anything else before we get out of here, Zach?
That's about it for me.
If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so. We're also on YouTube now. So our YouTube channel is Nate Hit the Foul Pole if you want to look that up. And then, as always, we are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and SoundCloud. And we would certainly appreciate a review or a 5-star rating. Anything you can do helps us out. That's about it for this week, and we will talk to you next show.